For sure. I am Danny Martin. I am the co-founder and CEO of Exposure Inc. We're an EdTech platform that focuses on providing experiential opportunities to students within the esports and gaming industry. I also own an 8,000 square foot esports studio and education center in Duncanville, Texas, about 23 miles south of Dallas. Our primary clients are schools, independent school districts, as well as pro esports professional teams, as well as endemic entities in which we do production in regards to esports and gaming.
Hey guys, I'm Kevin. I have a 9-year-old who plays esports. That's my qualification here. He really is on a YMCA. I would call it a team. It's not as organized, but it's interesting that at this age, you sign up for the YMCA list. There's tournaments, there's opportunities for him. So seeing this stuff in schools, like my kid's right at the right age where it's going to be normal for him, right, to see that. But I'm a venture attorney. I work with a lot of early stage companies.
Kevin is also a sponsor of North Texas A&M Network, so I very much appreciate that.
Money will buy a lot of applause.
All right, so I got a few questions, written down and ready to go. But at any time, if y'all have a question, if y'all have input or thought, we got a lot of knowledge in this room. Share it, just pop your hand up, and we'll get you involved. So, Danny, why don't we start with, reading through your bio, you are the co-founder of the company, but also you're involved in education in SMU, and what's the importance of that? Why do you spend your time towards education? Why is it, important for the industry? And then what does it help accomplish when raising that pre-seed, seed, early capital?
Yeah, one is the industry is still in its infancy stages. Point blank, the space of esports is still 1% of the gaming industry. So if you have to look at the actual valuation of gaming, it goes up from 300 million to 300 billion to 360 billion. So you'll see individuals speaking in regards to that. When you think about the esports space, you're looking at 1%, so it's like $3 billion industry. But like when I started, I had to identify individuals to help me run tournaments, which is typically the starting point for individuals who are not particularly the gamers that they want to become pros. There are individuals out there that want to create tournaments around those gamers, but in an infancy stage, it's just hard to find individuals to help you run brackets or individuals to help you set up the PCs and do the marketing of it. And so the education falls in line when it comes down to just teaching individuals how to do those specific skill sets, and those specific skill sets are easily digestible within the actual high school and college range. Specifically, I was in college and I was teaching some of my friends and peers how to help me run these tournaments that I had marketed out, where we have 50 or 100 or 200 individuals participating in our tournaments, and you can't just do that by yourself. And at that time, it wasn't specifically a Monster or Indeed that you can just put out a resume and individuals will come out. So we were forced to actively train and develop individuals. Well, if I wanted to run a successful tournament, I had to train individuals and guide them. And so education just became that critical component to individuals across the industry. And I recognize that it's not a lot of people educating in this space. Typically, if you want to get into the esports industry, you may have a lot of capital, not to say like what you mentioned in capital, but you invest in pro esports organizations and you're kind of chasing the Jerry Joneses and the Mark Cubans of the world. But in this instance, there's no pipeline of talent being developed. And so I looked at it as an opportunity to really start to build out the pipeline. Like he stated, like it become normalized in schools for esports pros organizations, but esports pro organizations, they have to recruit from the Wild Wild West essentially. They have to recruit someone out of Twitter or see someone that's high on the actual leaderboard charts. But when you get that player, you don't know if they've been structured like a Luka Doncic would be structured by going to high school and getting to the best college, and going from the best college to the best pro team. There's a structure that's there. Esports is you have to work behind, you have to work backwards. So building the infrastructure of college programs is very critical to helping those esports pro organizations find some adequate talent, and then that college has to identify where they're going to pull their recruitment from, and that's typically your high schools and academies. So we just recognize that it's a long way to go. So we have to build out the infrastructure from high schools to colleges and even middle schools that you're seeing. So when I had the opportunity to help build out the Southern Methodist Management Certificate Program here, I was really like excited to do it due to the fact that there's a business behind the industry outside of just the professional gamers. And if you're in the industry, you're finding that a lot of the woes amongst the chief marketing officers or the bracketologists or the production, it's hard to find talent. And so ultimately, when you start to focusing on building that actual talent, find a lot of success. Like key points over the last 2 years, 2 years ago, I remember looking at it around 27 colleges across the United States that offer esports programs and scholarships. Today, in 2 years, I have a list of 579 colleges that now have esports programs and offering scholarships. So for us, working with high schools, it gives us a great opportunity to expose those high school students to all of those colleges that are offering scholarships. And they're not just offering scholarships in that the way of professional or gaming. They're also looking for individuals to help them build their programs at their particular school as well. So a scholarship can equate to someone being good at Rocket League while at the same time being good at animation. And that's how they're actively looking at giving those scholarships.
That's interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
So on the topic of education, you said that gaming and esports is in its infancy. So what special considerations, if any, and this can be for both of you, should investors take, or what should investors know about gaming and esports? Is there a miscommunication somewhere? And if so, how do we fix it?
Yeah, I can
Sure.
Yeah, I think the miscommunication is that the big pro orgs is, for an example, like people are kind of like going heavy right now on phase in regards to the $1.2 billion valuation, and they're looking at the actual cap table as well as the revenue opportunities, and they're recognizing that mergers and acquisitions as well as the content is something that drives the valuation. But they're also looking at what else opportunities that the actual organization is bringing in revenue. So, when we think about this actual space, a lot of people are like, is it viable? Like, is it viable just to run an actual industry off of sponsorships? And frankly, it's not, especially when we're looking at economic downturn. So finding actual organizations that are really like building that pipeline and offering products or services, meaning like production services or building Unreal objects in regards to utilizing it for educational purposes, or that building it for companies that are utilizing that actual atmosphere in regards to prepping for the metaverse. So like you're finding these companies that actually are building out services and products and are selling those and driving in revenue. And so investors should kind of look at those type of companies just as much versus just the actual, like hey, this is the big company that we're the best esports pro team, because there are companies in the industry that are actually being able to drive in revenue from that of services and products that they offer. And I feel as if like those companies should be in the rooms just as much when it comes down to the hype of a pro esports organizations. We need the esports pro organizations, but they also need us just as much in regards to helping them drive their valuation.
That's a really insightful point. We do some work for one of the big esports organizations. They're currently trying to raise capital. They're having a hard time doing it. Because once you get past a lot of these esports teams, they've raised hundreds of millions of dollars. If you look at the cap table, they're investors. They're generally hedge fund magnates, private equity fund guys, owner people who own professional sports teams. And a lot of esports, like a lot of professional sports teams, are really passion plays. They're not quite business plays. And so now that they have exhausted those investments from those high net worth individuals, and they're out in the market trying to get investments from more traditional investors, there's a lot of pushback on the valuation. The numbers don't make sense. And then on top of that, if you look at the top organizations, none of them are hitting their forecasts. None of them are. And unfortunately, a lot of the forecasts, they're built in an inverted manner. They're built based on what the valuation was, right? Not just by looking at what you're saying is spot on, insightful. I need you to talk to our company actually. You got to start operations in Europe. You got to find players. You got to find a training facility. You got to hire coaches. All these things. They need to raise $20, $30 million to open this facility in Europe. Well, while their investors in the U.S. might be exhausted, they can easily go into Europe and find a bunch of high net worth sports team owners in Europe and say, do you want to get into esports? There's only 8 of them. There's only going to be 8 esports teams. we're one of them, we're an established brand in the US, look at our ownership group, you know who all these people are, they own all these professional teams, do you wanna be affiliated with them? And so a client, someone like the company that we represent, might be able to go over and do that and just continue to do this, and then once it gets through Europe, then they'll go to the Middle East, and there's no shortage of cash in the Middle East, and they'll do it and they'll fund it, and then they'll go to China and they'll fund it, whatever. But that'll only last so long, so I think what you'll start to see is they either need to come up with more innovative ways for revenues, and some of the things that Danny's saying are really, really interesting, or there's just gonna be this cycle where they just continue to hop to other countries. And what Danny said about M&A is spot on, guys. When a large company needs to drive revenues, you can either create them or you can buy them. And so a lot of times you buy revenues through M&A. That only lasts for so long, because at some point in time, you have bought more revenues than what can be supported in the future, and that's all gonna collapse. So I think it's really, really insightful point. I agree that these later stage companies are gonna have to come up with better ways to drive revenues.
Yeah. And I have to add in regards to this conversation too, and it's good that you just mentioned it. So like just what you said in regards to M&A, and you mentioned the actual phase plan content and M&A. I felt like, Eric asked me to be on this panel, and I was just like, okay, how? Because it's weird for me, because I've never raised outside of starting the company, where I went to my mother, who was, I worked with her at IBM, and I was just like, I've been working in this plan, and I've got a lot of insight in this industry, and I really want to start an esports company. And she said, hey, I feel you, go do what you need to go do. So she gave me my first initial capital. It was about like 100K or something like that. And so I used that to create an MVP at that point. And as we built the MVP, I was like working so hard to try to talk to as many investors as I possibly can. Like from Mark Cuban to traveling, like I had to talk to so many investors, and I just got to a point where I just got exhausted. Like I was spending more time going for investors without actually building the product, right? And and once I just got fed up, I was just like, let me just go build a product and build a team to go help with the product. Which, if you don't have any capital, that's incredibly hard. So it really had to I had to really focus on my charismatic personality to really help with that perspective, and really build influence in the industry, like subject matter experts, like, hey, this guy knows what he's talking about, he's just not talking. And as we built the product, we were like, okay, we sold that product. Like our first product that we sold with that was education to a school, Lancaster. When COVID hit, Lancaster was one of the schools that was like, hey, you guys have virtual education, and we really are interested in gaming, Lancaster ISD, for example. And we have funds, but the funds are used for like agriculture and the medical industry, and but they're requiring of going into an actual facility. But you guys have something virtual, and gaming is typically virtual, so we want to go with you guys. And I was like, whoa, this is our product that we have, that we are now able to make capital on. So after doing that so long, we were driving in revenue. We are driving in revenue to the point to where now, because we're engaged with the schools, those same companies, those professional organizations that are now raising all those companies, they're like, hey, you got a platform, let's just acquire you. So we went from $100,000 starting to now, getting acquisition offers for $25, $40 million. And it's like we bypassed the whole raising stage because of that instance of the pro orgs right now are like, we gotta buy companies that are actually driving in revenue to really help our valuation. So it's just totally, I even think about it today, it's just completely weird. And even if we're in a position right now where we're like, do we have to sell? Like, if it's gonna be there, do we sell now? Is the market gonna leave, or do we just hold it off and be like Kajabi or something and just be able to like raise $750 million, your first raise? So it's like, you don't know what to do, so that was very interesting when we see the actual terms of the esports organizations and how they're having to try to buy companies to justify the revenue.
Well, if you're trying to raise money, I would not expect your success to be like games.
Yeah, I didn't expect it.
Yeah, it's gonna be a little harder.
A question. So you spent some time out talking to the market and sort of early stage product orthodoxy suggests that if you try to find a place to start, you go and talk to as many potential customers as you can, and use that to de-risk your business plan,
Yes.
essentially, and particularly what you go to market with first, with segment and target and so forth. So, how much of those early conversations fed into what your company eventually became? I know you've got revenue streams coming in from operating activities, and that's kind of where the bread and butter comes from.
Mm-hmm.
But how much of that was dictated by opportunity versus these discussions that you had with potential customers and investors?
Oh man, investors want to see something locked in, and you know they see your actual revenue, but they also we got a lot of support when we actually had contracts that was annualized, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the things that we didn't have for a long time. So it was always like, you cool, but you know how long you gonna last, you know? So the deals that came was just very sharky, like sharky to the point to where if I'm passionate about the space, I'm not finna give up my company for 50, 60, 70%. Like, no way, you know, for, you know, 100,000 or 200,000. Cause in my mind, I'm like, I put that in there, you know? So basically I'm just breaking even. And I feel like this is an industry that I really, really love. And I'm not gonna give up, you know, and be in a position to where I'm basically working for the investor and they get the chance to tell me everything that they wanna tell me. And I'm in a position where it's just like, you know, like I can't even have the mental fortitude to even think about the industry and the growth of the industry and the future of the industry because I'm trying to meet this demand right now because this individual wants their capital back tomorrow.
Right.
So it went into a lot of it, you know, like a lot of those conversations where it's like that investor, and me knowing that by hearing those conversations from the investors and like talking, and listening, it became more so like, let me now listen to the customer more so, and let me focus in on giving them what they need. And that became just a natural element where I think now I'm looking at like every business should be that way, you know, like listen to your customer and really building a product that they are needing, especially in these times, like in the educational system. You know, teachers are leaving in droves and schools are trying to figure out how to, you know, combat learning loss. Like right now, everyone is trying to figure it out on how to engage with the actual students. So it was more so attending educational events and conventions and talking to teachers and empathizing with the actual educators. And you get a lot of that, especially where we're at in the southern sector of Dallas, where educators are like, they're having to battle resources, they're having to battle discipline problems, they're having to battle. So you get the most real insight in these particular schools that have to deal with all kind of things. And once you figure out how to add something to them, then they're now a supporter for you and they're championing you into every other group or community that they're a part of. And that helps you expand incredibly fast.
Do you all want more questions now, or do you want to go through more of your questions?
You're more than welcome to ask now.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Danny, thank you so much for what you do for our university. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I want to ask a question. If we could take a step back, I want to ask a question about the talent.
Yeah.
So here at SMU, we have a esports club of 500 students.
Yep.
About 250 of them are active. And then we have a club team that plays TCU for the Iron Skillet.
Yep.
Last fall. How do you see the industry taking lessons learned, especially on exploitation of athletes, from La Liga, from the Premier League, from the NBA, from the NFL, on everything from mental health to access of technology,
Yep.
Especially in underserved communities as well as rural communities? How do you see that the athlete, because she or he only has a lifespan of 21, and then their hand-eye coordination's gone after 21, right?
Very much so.
So can you talk a little bit about how you discover talent, how you build that talent pipeline that's not exploitive, and where you see the future going?
Oh yeah, that's a really and I'm just gonna be so like open, and I just shoot from the hip. That's a question where I'm trying to figure out too, right? So, we're even as our company, we're in a position right now where jobs in the esports industry right now are almost like 95% software based. So right now in our company, we have an events coordination team, we have a marketing team, we have a production team, we have a content team, we have an education team. All of them leverage platforms to get their jobs done. For events coordination, we use a platform called ShowFlow, which deals with run shows for our clients. For production, we use a platform called vMix. Learning vMix can run your whole production for your particular client. And for our content team, they're leveraging platforms like Adobe Photoshop, Premiere, animations platforms as well. So learning those skill sets are something that you can learn in high school or college, and you can actually develop your portfolio by working with clients. And so for us, seeing that we have the visibility of the industry where clients come to us, those particular students are always working on projects for the NFL or NBA or esports pro organizations. We have pro organizations that rent out our facility all the time to do boot camping sessions. So those actual students or staff members that are doing work on presenting our facility, where they put in graphics of FaZe Clan or Luminosity, they're able to put that on their portfolio. And so by the time that esports pro organization leaves our building, or they post it onto a channel about what they've done, the industry just just grabs on them, and they ultimately are telling me hey, I'm getting this offer here, or I'm getting this offer here. And as we haven't built that core model yet, I'm having to crank my head out, because I'm having to try to build a pipeline really fast while individuals are leaving really fast. So it becomes very difficult because that pipeline, that structure is not there. So I'm trying to figure it out now, and totally honestly open up to you. That is where I feel as if most companies are in that space right now, especially when it comes down to how we kind of look at ourselves as like an academy, because there's no really academies yet, in regards to esports and gaming. So I'm in that infancy stage of building some of the first academies in regards to esports and gaming. But in order to have a proficient model, we have to figure out that pipeline and a very sound pipeline, because right now our talent is getting poached like crazy, and I'm trying to keep my emotion out of it, because it's also wow, that's good. Talent is leaving that's the goal, but at the same sense, we gotta run a company. So I don't wanna be you gotta be here for this amount of days and this amount of years, and I'm trying to figure that out.
The contract.
Yeah, like that.
Start charging some transfer.
Yeah.
So Kevin, you said money.
So this question is for Kevin. When we're talking about my first raise, the topic here, what would you say for a company? So Danny is a bit farther ahead. As he said, he went from the family and friends round to he's going to get $750 million next year. But for those of us in the room who are still, early on, let's talk about the angel investing, crowdfunding, getting your pre-seed. What are the considerations that VCs are looking at in those cases? And what, how should you phase it out? If you just have the idea, should you go ask anybody for money, or should you put your own skin in the game? And at what point, what is the earliest point a VC or an angel investor would be willing to listen to you? What do you need to have in front of them?
Good question. The answer to your last question is they have different criteria. In a perfect world, there is absolutely a path to growth for an emerging company, for a venture company. Friends and family, or like they call it in South America, FF&F, friends, family, and fools. Right? Friends and family, then angel round, then usually some sort of a safe or convertible bridge round, then seed round, then A round, then B, with maybe some bridges in between. So in a perfect situation, you raise 100, 200 grand from your friends and family, you raise 750 grand or $1 million from some local angels, you raise $3 million from the seed round, you raise 10 million in an A round, so on and so forth. That happens more than anything else, but that's still a very low percentage of how companies actually raise money. I would would say. Less than a quarter of the companies raise money that way. So everyone else does it some different way. You got this way, you know, he was able to build an amazing company with 100 grand and he'll raise a large round. People piece together. So there's no, I want to say there's a path that you should be pursuing, but don't be frustrated if you get off that path. The first money has to come from your friends and family. It just has to. If you or the people around you don't believe in you, then you can't expect a stranger to do so. 10, 15 years ago, I had a guy come into my office. He just wanted to raise $30,000. He had this idea in the food space. He wanted to raise $30,000. And I said, $30,000? He said, how much equity do you have in your home? He said, about 250 grand. I said, well, just take out money against your home. He says, oh, my wife will never let me do that. I said, if your wife doesn't believe in you, how's anyone else gonna believe in you? So you have to raise money. You have to give these strangers who are investors confidence that the people around you, right, are believing in your idea. So that's the first one. After that, honestly, that gap from raising friends and family, most people can do that, until you get to your seed round is the hardest one, for sure. Once you get to your seed round or past your seed round, there's a lot of processes in place, there's a lot of institutions in place, there's lots of venture investors, there's lots of angel groups. Raising $4 million is so much easier than raising $1 million. But when you get to raising $4 million, it's because you've checked the box off on a number of things. You've raised $1 million, you've got your MVP out, you probably have a few revenues in. So I just want to give you, anyone else trying to raise money, comfort that the friends and family round, the step in between there and raise your seed round is the hardest to raise money, for sure. To do that, there's a number of ways. Within esports, I would not be just broadly approaching investors, because most investors don't get it, they don't have the appetite for it. Even though venture is risky inherently, esports is even riskier for the reasons we discussed early on. So you have to find people who are already accustomed to it. I'm assuming there's esports accelerators out there, and you might actually turn into that. We should talk about that, because we've talked about doing one at SMU for a long time, right? I've talked to people in the business school and the law school about what could SMU really get on track for. I'll go ahead and put it out there if anyone's listening. Sports betting, fantasy sports, some college needs to get good at that. There's no reason why SMU can't do it. But anyway.
There's ethical problems with that, I would think.
It's legal.
I would just say, I think there's ethical problems with that.
I think that esports, there's accelerators for it. Start with accelerators. As a broad-based, Capital Factory is a fantastic accelerator. It does things, it doesn't take too much equity to open things up. I don't know how much Capital Factory has dived directly into esports, but I have had conversations with them about getting more into esports. So that would be one place that I would look. I would look for other just national esports accelerators. I'm sure that some exist. And then you just have to find the right angels. This guy's probably a good start to connect you to people, but you really just have to scratch and claw to get to that $1 million, $2 million, $3 million. And then after that, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's easier. Yeah. So if you think that if you're trying to raise 750 grand and you think, oh my gosh, there's some fountain that I haven't found yet in the forest, and there's some fountain of cat, it's not there. You just have to keep looking, and you'll eventually find it. I mean, raising money early stage, it's more about persistence and the person than it is about idea or traction or anything else. It's just really, I've seen a lot of people with really bad ideas raise money through persistence. I've seen a lot of people with really good ideas not raise money because they're lazy.
So can you dig into that more? What kind of person do you need to be, and who should you be persisting with?
Well, anyone. I don't think there's, if we look at statistics, sure, men raise more than women, white people raise more than black people, right? Like statistically speaking, there is a path for it. However, I do think there's a lot of money that is being earmarked for minorities, underrepresented, for women, so that's a good spot. Also, if you personally out there raising money, there's a lot of women-focused organizations that'd be more than happy to get you in touch with to focus on them. Golden Seeds is one, Jingona Ventures out of Chicago is another one, so there's ones out there. There's one in Houston that's focused on women. You just gotta go through your network. You need to find someone like me. I don't know where the money is for you, but I can probably introduce you to 3 or 4 people who would introduce you to 3 or 4 people who would introduce you to 3 or 4 people, and then you'll find the money, right? That's where the persistence comes from. Cold calling is really hard. A lot of people, when you have a business that's already raised $3 million and you're ready for your $10 million raise, yes, you can cold call. You can just drop your deck on a VC's desk through email. They have analysts, it's their job to review that. You'll find someone. For you, if you're trying to raise $750, $1 million, I'll pay any something.
And if I could touch up on the angel perspective, I would say one consideration would be education. So we were talking about education within SMU it is in some ways comparable to Web3 NFT space, where angel investors are generally unfamiliar. And Warren Buffett himself said, if you don't know it, don't invest in it. So you're not going, with that, you're not going to capture, 30 out of 40 of a room full of investors when you pitch. But you will capture an investor whose kids are into esports. You will get 30 no's before you get a yes, but you're finding that one key investor that can potentially join your advisory board, that can help mentor, that can, work out something along those. So I would say there's a little bit of an educational aspect and a safety aspect. You want to assure them, yes, it's new, it's emerging, it's, maybe not as proven as a 200-year-old industry like retail, right? But it's a safe investment, because here's how you're gonna get your return, here's the steps I'm gonna take, and here's our, revenue model, business model, all that good stuff.
Mike makes a really good point about angel networks. There's 20 some odd actual networks in Texas. NTAN, TIE's coming back, HI's coming back, Aggie Angel Network, Houston Angel Network, Baylor Angel Network, Central Texas Angel Network, the West Texas Angel Network, Midland has one.
Greg,
Yes, Greg's software Greg's SaaS-based business list. If you were to go and pitch at all of those, and most of them doing virtual these days, so you don't have to get a roadshow around Texas, but over the next 3-6 months, you're gonna pitch all of those. I don't think you're gonna get a syndicated angel group to invest just because it's esports. But I do think you're gonna find a handful of investors, like Mike said, who have a kid who are interested, who might say, you know what, we're not gonna be able to syndicate 250, but I'll put in 25 or 50, and I'll help you get this rolling, and I'll introduce you to a few more people. So that would be a long road, right? But I think that could be proven as well.
And this will be the last thing I ask, because I don't wanna make this about me. I was asking that question so that everyone could benefit, but I do appreciate the special attention. Just to be clear, so I own an edtech startup company called Kandake Tech, and our first product that we've been building is called Bandkey, and it's focused on passion-based master classes for Gen Z gamers and creatives. And so, of course, Danny and my friend here, Penny with Fourth Ring Studios, formerly Phase Plan, and lots of others have really gravitated towards us because, like your son and my son, who's on a panel later, they are the kids that are learning everything that they know about gaming from YouTube. Tyler, my 14-year-old, was downstairs at 12. He built his first gaming PC. And it was because I bought an old one from Danny, because Tyler decided he wanted to game better. He didn't want to be an engineer. He just wanted to be able to game better. And so Danny sold him an old PC. He broke a CPU pin and had to start from scratch. And that's when I realized, I said, well, I guess I gotta find someone to teach you how to build a PC, because Danny's busy. Danny said, take it apart, put it back together, then you'll know. I'm like, that's the lesson, Danny? And so, and so when he broke it, Tyler said, Mom, I've been knowing how to build a gaming PC. I learned it on YouTube. And so we are actually building an edtech platform that helps teach kids these micro skills in a more safe and curated space, but also connects them to the phase plans and the complexities and the epic games and riot games, to understand the industries behind this, so that their students are not just learning to play better or to create their own anime and TikTok videos, but they're learning about the industries that are farther ahead. So from that regard, and even looking at the fact that exposure, while you're in esports, you are absolutely edtech, which was a brilliant transition and pivot for you during the pandemic. And I think that's another big piece of why you are starting to have even more success, because you're in edtech, and edtech is becoming far more normalized since the pandemic. What types of opportunities do you see there are even more opportunities at that cross section of edtech and gaming?
Absolutely. So now you said a hot buzzword, right?
Yeah.
If I would have known you're an edtech company, it would change my whole answer.
Okay.
I know a number of VCs that are interested in investing into edtech. Now you're having a broad conversation. Just because you're edtech doesn't mean a VC is going to invest. You have to get to a certain stage. So let's go back to your original question of what stage do you need to be at for an angel or investor or a VC to be interested. Angels, you should just be where you are. And I don't know where you are, but nascent, brand new is totally fine for most angels. For a VC, for a real VC, now VCs are getting earlier and earlier stage. Usually $1 million ARR is a run rate, so it's about 80 grand a month.
And what is ARR?
Annual revenue rate, right? So your ARR, annual revenue rate, or your monthly MRR, monthly run rate, monthly revenue rate, needs to be about 80 grand. Once you're 80 grand a month, 80 grand a month, translates to roughly $1 million a year, that gets you on a lot of radars. But there's a lot of earlier stage funds that will look at someone, you probably wanna be revenue positive, just be past revenue. 10 grand a month in recurring revenue would be reasonable. And then, obviously, you have to have a product in market, you have to have customers, but there's still a lot of things, a lot of companies raise money, they raise a seed round, then they pivot, they change, so it's not like you have to be locked in. But as far as how far along you need to be from talking to someone, talk to a sophisticated venture investor, I would say at least 10 to 20 grand a month in revenue.
So, could you talk about IP? It's something that angel investors generally care very much about, and generally won't know how they apply to the esports and gaming industry. So from a legal perspective as well as the entrepreneur perspective, could you dive into IP for you
Sure.
guys?
So one of our clients is actually buying an esports team right now, right? We're in the process of going through that. IP's been a hot topic. As you may imagine, there's not a lot of IP to protect. They're buying a team, so what intellectual property they have the contracts with their players, which are very important, but those are very easy to see how long the contracts last. The players have accounts, they have social media accounts, which are valuable, they have social media or gaming accounts, which are valuable to the followers on them. And we want to make sure that the team owns those accounts, so that when we buy the team goes away and it's subsumed in our team, that we still own those accounts. So that's valuable. But beyond that, for buying a team, there's just not a whole lot of intellectual property to create. Our team may have, there's logos and names and stuff, that's pretty easy. A team may have a certain way of doing things, but those are really just business processes that wouldn't really be protectable or patentable, right? So from a team, from a pure esports perspective, if you're not creating games, there's not a whole lot to protect. Now, on an ed tech platform, definitely, and I'll let Dan pick up there.
Yeah, for sure. So that was one of our biggest focal points when we had our technological platform, and we started to gain users onto that platform. That's what really made our valuation. So when it came down to being acquired, the acquisition companies, the pro organizations or the esports organizations, they really wanted to purchase us because of our IP, because of the tech platform where the students were actively on, and that they can actually cross-market to in regards to bringing in new fan bases to their actual esports pro players, as well as any of their initiatives when it comes down to celebrity talent or when they do productions or things like that. But the IP for our technological platform, they just basically was like, hey, we put this value in your IP, everything else, staffing and all of that, is, we're not really worried about it, but you guys are dope, we want to keep you guys on, but we really want to purchase your IP. And that became the realization of like, wow, look how, they're not saying that they don't care about us, but they're saying that they don't care about us, and they want the actual IP of the technology platform, and they're already bringing in engineers just to vet the platform and to say, hey, this engineer is gonna be on this platform running this, and hey, we're gonna give you a salary to where you can actually work on that platform with the engineer that we're bringing in to run this technology piece. So that's when we started to become like, whoa, this definitely is not ours anymore, and it's, do you really just want the IP? You really want the technology that's there? So that's when I started recognizing like, wow, it was my realization that this is powerful, and IP became that much more important to me.
Software can be hard to patent,
Yes.
copyright it. So to the extent you are developing any software, you need to visit with a patent specialist quickly and make sure that they guide you through it. Now, sometimes the answer is just be better, be more competitive than everyone else. And Mark Cuban's always big on saying he just doesn't believe in patents all that much, right? He thinks everything should be open and just let competition rule the world. That's not exactly how the US works, but I think there's some truth in that. From the perspective of just a startup, I think I get a lot of clients, if you have a real science or engineering focused product, then yes, you want to patent it. A lot of clients get so focused on protecting their IP rather than developing it.
Yeah.
Like what Danny was saying, develop it, get out there, get ahead of market, and then that's really the other real value for them.
And I really learned that after I graduated University of Texas, San Antonio, I got an offer to move to Silicon Valley, and I stayed there for like 2.5 years, working with some pretty dope tech startups. And outside of just energy of San Francisco, it was more so like you'll see on banners like, hey, collaboration is key. When you think about homebrew and like individuals being able to share information about, they were more focused in on just building and developing and competing in that instance. But when I came back, I grew up in an area like that's pretty hard in the southern sector of Dallas, and like you can't even ask somebody like, you know, for some help, because they're more protective on everything that they have, because they may feel like that's their last. And so, you know, I going somewhere else brought me back home, where also it's more like, you know, focus on building the platform and, you know, really kind of let everything else out. IP is, you know, patents is really, really important, but when you're in tech, you can't really patent code. So it's ultimately like, get out there and really, you know, build a dope product, and your consumers are going to shout for you, that really differentiates you from the next company. You know, that's kind of how like I am looking at it. So I'm kind of like in the same Cuban type of effect. But at the end of the day, when someone wants to purchase your company, they're looking at how many users on the platform and how long it's actually going to take them to build it if they were to build it on their own. So they're really buying it due to the fact of saving time, so they don't have to spend that same amount of money in building it themselves.
Thank you. Sir?
Danny, before we end the session, can you talk a little bit about the Esports Certificate Program at Cox and your role in it, and what are the major components? You probably covered a couple of those already this morning, but if you could talk a little bit about that. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the focal points right now that we're seeing as the industry, well, in the gaming industry, like certifications are like the no-no in the industry, but it's due to the fact that a lot of individuals within the actual space, they grew up in the space without having such certificates, and a lot of gamers are like, don't like school, you know, like, hey, we've been in the basement, or we've been doing in the industry, going to these tournaments, and we don't like school. When we transitioned from that of our competitive company to that of EdTech, we had a whole lot of team members like, man, we just got out of school to come work with you guys, because you're in the industry, you're not gonna turn this back into a school, you know, and we got that flag back, you know. So the ideal of certifications in the industry is still being accepted, because people feel like they can just go out there and build it and run events and do things, which they can. But when it comes down to the pipeline that we spoke on, it's very critical, because individuals in the space are looking at themselves in the space right now, but they're not necessarily thinking as if like they have kids and they have to groom them kids to where they're now proficient adults. The purpose of like universities being able to incorporate these programs is very vital to the actual pipeline of the industry. So that's when, you know, when I was asked, I was like, yes, I understand the value of it and the business principles in regards to working on Southern Methodist University's Management Certificate Program. So what is the basis of the program? So it literally is a management certificate that speaks on the actual operations of an event, or how to build an organizational structure within esports, and it also speaks on law. And one of the big focal points for, you know, my session, there's 6 courses that it takes over a 6-month time period. So for me, I teach organizational management in esports. So I talk about like the GMs, the chief marketing officer roles, how to put together an actual event. And I'm essentially like the capstone to the actual management certificate program, where everything that's been spoke on from course 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is kind of really bundled up in course 6, and it really makes it practical, like a capstone in college. And so the overall goal is to allow the students to understand the inner workings of the industry in the form of building their own organizations from a management perspective. And so I feel like that's very critical going into the actual workspace. You know, application is for me is the biggest thing. That's why we built our facility, is really, once you learn the industry and understand the inner workings of it, you still have to have an element of application, like literally touching and feeling the actual production equipment or running an actual event, because that's how the actual companies look at being able to pool talent, is who's actually done it. But ultimately, like I stated, the Wild Wild West, if people have done it, they're not as groomed in structure of understanding the inner workings of the industry. So actual certification programs like this is needed to have individuals understanding everything that goes behind the scenes. For an example, I started fixing consoles in college as a way to make capital. when it came down to understanding the software side, I had a better appreciation for the actual software side because I knew the inner workings of how to build a PC or how to fix an Xbox console or PlayStation. It's the same concept. For individuals who are taking the management certificate program, they understand that the inner workings of the industry can make it much more appreciative when it comes down to actually applying that knowledge in real form. And that's respectable when it comes down to companies like me that want to hire someone, because you can be good, but if you don't have a sure understanding or passion for everything that comes on, when it comes down to working with a team, you don't know or understand or have empathy of the next individual that you're working with because you don't know the full gamut of the actual industry. So that management certificate and other certificate programs in other schools become very much more critical when it comes down to having companies like myself or any other companies trying to find the best talent to help our companies grow.
All right, so, M&A. Kevin, I know this is also your department, your specialty a little bit, but, you know, talking about fundraising, let's talk about an exit real quick. What is an ideal exit strategy? Is it IPO, the kind of traditional route, bought out, or IPO, or are there more options? Please shine some light on that.
I think it's naive to try and plan for that so early on. I hear a lot of investors, particularly investors who aren't sophisticated venture investors or angel investors, say, well, what's your exit strategy? Who knows? Who knows what the market conditions are going to be? You know, 6 years ago, everyone wanted IPO. Right? No one wants IPO right now, right? So if you say, well, I'm building towards an IPO, I don't know that necessarily makes sense. I think what companies should try to do is have a timeline, and then they'll just explore the market at that point in time. If you build a business that's at least at a $10 million a year revenue run rate, maybe 10 to 20, you can sell it. You can sell it. There are professionals out there who can help you find it. There are investment bankers, brokers. You can just about always sell it. If you don't want to sell it and you want to raise capital, you can raise capital. You can raise capital through private markets. You can raise it through public markets. It's becoming easier and easier to raise capital through private markets because there's so many different ways you can do it. You have all the regular ways. Now you have crowdfunding. Now we're starting to see secondary markets pop up where you can early stage employees or early investors can have liquidity for their equity. So that's not raising money to the company, but it's liquidity, which some people want. So I don't think that it's good at very early stage to say, well, we're building towards an IPO, we're building towards a sale. You just should be building towards growth, right? We're building towards 10 million revenue or 100 employees or whatever it is. Once you get there, your attorneys and your investment bankers will guide you through what's best. And just to be honest with you guys, I run a boutique law firm. We don't do any public work. I've had a couple companies exit to publicly traded companies. We've never raised public security money. Those are much bigger deals, right? Traditionally, a bigger law firm would do those sorts of things. And we've got plenty to do. So I don't think the fact that, I'm sharing that because we don't do public work and we've represented, I don't know, 50, 100 clients through exits over the years. So there's definitely ways to exit without having to go to the public market. And I think it's a little bit of a misnomer that you think you have to grow an IPO. That's just not what companies are doing.
I would like to add in regards to, as you're starting, whether you're in your C, Series A, Series B, well, Series B, you should have all this together, but you know, your accountants and your attorneys are like so powerful for your actual company, because there's gonna be a lot of things. If you're focused on a product, you're not really thinking about, you know, the client's contract that comes through and the terms that are in the actual contract. You're seeing it, but there's some things inside of there that if this particular client has a really good attorney, they're actually thinking about the benefit of that client that they have. They're not necessarily thinking about you. They're looking to, you know, win over in regards to that. So if you have somebody that's really dope on your side, they can catch those. And if you want to raise for anything, you should be raising to use capital for that of your attorney or accounting, because they're really going to stop you from having to waste money in the long run when it comes down.
We're getting this. Okay,
Yeah,
let's get this on video. Check this out. This is good.
Yeah, I think that was, if I had to turn back the hands of time, that would be something I was really focusing on. I looked at it from the lens of, man, it's so expensive, to now like, okay, I could have missed this. And when you get on the calls with attorneys, you know, they tell you like, hey, if you did this, you wouldn't be doing this, or you wouldn't have to experience this. And now, as I'm like glad that I'm in the position, but had I known it a lot sooner, I feel as if like the growth of our company could have been much faster, because we spent time traveling backwards to mitigate mistakes that we made, in an industry that's moving incredibly fast. So now I'm looking at, oh, this competitor is doing this, and this, and like now we're going backwards when now, that competitor has now more market share now. So it starts to become more emotionally draining and mentally exhausting, because you're like, man, I wish I would have made that decision better, early on. But you can beat yourself up, but you can have somebody that's knowledgeable to be able to help you get through that. And if you're listening to that individual, they'll mitigate you a lot of mistakes. While at the same time, you still have to vet the attorneys and accountants to make sure that you have the right individual on your actual team versus it just looking at it from a money perspective.
Thank you. We've got 2 minutes left if anybody has a question. Pam, do you have a question? I'm just gonna pick on you, you're the only one over there.
I'm enjoying all the knowledge.
Awesome. All right, well, thank you everyone for coming, and please give it up for our speakers.
Before you go,